Hello everyone, welcome back to another video, and in this video we're going to check out Moon's take on addiction economy, or at least that's what he called it. Moon typically takes up a universal view. We've covered addiction in the past, just in the realm of psychology, gaming, and how it can lead to grand senses of neglect. Being that this is in lieu of the kind of stuff that we cover on the channel, I figured we'd check it out, listen to his take, and then give our thoughts. Without further ado, let's get into it. The addiction economy.
The world runs on addiction. Look at everything around you. Kids vaping, people's backs bent over distracted, everybody isolating themselves from the nagging voice of consciousness with soundproofing headphones, addicts on the streets struggling to stand, bars and pubs filled with red-faced alcoholic droogs, coffee shops everywhere, 4 shots of espresso per cup, lines out of the door. Everybody addicted to the chemical preservatives, sugar and fat stuffed into the daily food of millions. Millions of young men trying to fill a hole of connection through OnlyFans and adult content. Whilst GDP in the S&P 500 might steadily be growing, the West's economic trajectory is running on a toxic fuel, creating a brand new phenomenon known as the addiction economy, the future of the Western world. But what happens if this continues to spiral? Where do we go from here, where everybody's counting their company points, subscriptions, getting their drip of dopamine from chains throughout the day? What happens when for the entire economy to function, everybody has to be addicted to products, points, dings, likes, and vape hits? When everybody is constantly being psychologically targeted with chemical, subconscious manipulation, and our primal desires being controlled by faceless companies? What will that future entail? Well, this is the coming story of the West, and it's something we need to be paying far more attention to, which is why in this video you're going to soon realize that everything in your life, in all of your friends and family's lives, is slowly just becoming another part of the addiction economy. This is a brand new phenomena, and we're going to explore the future implications of this in the very near future, as this will soon be one of the major coming concerns for humanity. To understand why, we need to understand what is actually driving the addiction economy in the first place. Historian David Courtwright coined the term limbic capitalism. This was an early version of the idea of the addiction economy, as limbic capitalism refers to economic practices that target the brain's limbic system, which governs pleasure and reward. Because you see, addiction isn't limited to chemical substances. Behavioral addictions, such as those seen in gambling, gaming, and social media use, exploit the brain's reward system. This is basic stuff, and we're all pretty aware of this at this point. And people started to realize that if they can create products and experiences designed to hook users through constant repeated short bursts of dopamine, you would make far more money in the long run than just a single standalone purchase. That's why companies in the last decade are doing everything they can to get you on some form of subscription, to ensure ongoing consumption and money for the business. And the tactics they often use, such as persuasive design and targeted marketing, actually replicate some psychological techniques used on animals to train and domesticate them. And we can see this really clearly in the tech industry, as social media platforms like Instagram and TikTok are quintessential examples of the addiction economy at work. As users spend increasing amounts of time on these platforms, they become addicted to the attention and dopamine rush that come from likes, comments, and shares. This constant feedback loop fosters a reliance on external validation, which is of course highly addictive, and probably almost everybody watching this has experienced it at least once in their life. However, this attention-seeking behavior whilst rewarding in the digital realm can be really toxic in real life. In real-world interactions, the same behaviors encouraged by social media can lead to shallow relationships and an unwillingness to accept other people's imperfections. People begin to judge and value others based on the superficial criteria used by platforms like Instagram based on appearance and status. This shift in focus towards self-promotion comes at the expense of genuine connections with others and a broader awareness of the world around them. Alongside these traits, other characteristics of narcissism, such as arrogance and a victim complex, start to manifest. And we see this on a cultural and societal level. We see it everywhere in the media all the time. Celebrities who are victims, arrogance everywhere, people who think they know everything. And this addiction to online validation explains why so many influencers and celebrities, billionaires, crypto bros, all of these people appear so self-absorbed and oblivious to their own actions. A classic example is when influencers get upset when they try and quote-unquote prank someone in public spaces. But the addiction economy goes far beyond this stuff in social media.
Well, I mean, it's the grand identity versus concept argument. I think that a lot of people that aren't aware of identity versus concept is the concept is objectively drawn based on who you want to be seen as versus identity is actually who you are, the self, right? The self when no one's looking, the integral form of yourself. And when we when people are gradually escaping to the concept, they just become so detached from the self that they actually believe they're this thing in the concept's point of view, or at least in the concept's perspective. Naturally so. I mean, you kind of see this in video games too, where people would have an avatar or a character, and because of everything that they've put into this character, it becomes more prominent to just be the character then, because at least the character is able to do the things in life that the self isn't capable of doing. And so it leaves you in this limbic state of, well, it feels better to be this than to be that, so I'm going to keep being this because being that is too hard. And that's obviously what happens when we just incrementally decrease our interaction with ourselves. We just start to lose sight of who we are, and whether people want to know it or not, that makes us more impressionable. That makes us easier to manipulate, because you need to be grounded in something. If you're going to navigate life, you got to be grounded in something a lot more than just something you drew up for the sake of social media, because that's how it started. Obviously, what it turned into was an obsession, but it goes back to the pranking too. It's like they genuinely believe, because of the concept that they're entertaining, that they see this so much that they think it's normal. And then when they end up pranking the wrong people, right? Because they see it so much through their own feeds and through their own interactions online. When this happens and then they get this negative feedback, they're like, oh, it was just a joke. It's like, yeah, cool. That's great. That's not how the world is. But because you're so tied up in your concept, you forgot what the world was.
As beneath the surface of all these algorithms and social media companies lies a razor and blade business model. This is the idea where initial products are sold at a loss or low margin to secure.
And in reference to the motives, or at least the dopamine pathways, I said it again, it's not just a reward track. It's more elaborative than that, and it's more of a motive track, and that's something that I've explained previously in other channels. Moon, obviously, he's trying to say it like it's common knowledge. Yes, it's common knowledge to regard dopamine as reward driven only, but that's not the case, and that's actually slightly disproven. It's motive based, not reward based, because we can desensitize the reward and then still do it. That means there's no longer a reward.
Long-term profit from consumables. It's basically how companies make you dependent on their products. In the tech world, companies run on a loss for years, all relying on investor money until they have you so sucked in that you have no choice but to give in to using their algorithm all the time. And so they can then charge the prices, knowing that you're so addicted, you will pay no matter what. And if it's not prices, it's collecting your data, exploiting you, or making you more addicted to their algorithms with things like Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts. This is how they suck you in. But before, this used to be kind of contained just to the tech industry, but now this is emerging throughout the entire economy. From printing cartridges to coffee pods, Adobe, Spotify, Hilton Hotels, McDonald's. These are all using limbic capitalism, as they're all trying to transform your one-time purchase into ongoing revenue streams through points, rewards, boosts, and short bursts of dopamine. While they offer convenience and access to a wide range of products, all of these chains, all of these giant brands are making you dependent on their services. And then it becomes almost impossible to switch, because you've already gained so much trust with that company, you've given over so much of your information, so much of your money, your time, your data, your points, that it's almost impossible to leave. The muscle memory and habitual nature of all of these services creates a psychological dependency on their products. It could be Hilton Hotel points, British Airways points, McDonald's points, Instagram likes, literally anything these days. Everything and anything is constantly pushing you to be addicted to their product. I mean, how many subscriptions do you actually have at this point? It's probably accrued so much over time that you've actually lost count. I mean, the average person in America now spends $273 a month on just subscriptions alone, and yet at the same time, less than 1/3 of Americans could afford a $1,000 emergency expense without going into debt. And this is where things start to get really interesting, because when you peel back the layers, you realize something else is going on here. One of the worst things about the addiction economy is that the politicians who should be regulating this stuff are actually profiting from it. Just recently, Supreme Court Justice Alito sold Bud Light stock, then bought Coors during the boycott. And I found this story thanks to Ground News, a website and app that is designed to dismantle echo chambers and show you the news that you might be missing. Go to ground.news/moon to check them out. With Ground News, you can see how different media outlets report on the news. In this instance, one source on the right claims that it's just a fabricated scandal, whereas sources on the left claim he's just a right-wing internet fanatic. However, the Ground News bias distribution feature shows me that 38% of media coverage of the scandal is by left-leaning sources, and another 38% of coverage was from the right, with 25% in the center. If you don't already know today's sponsor, Ground News does a really great job at making news completely transparent. Their app and website gathers related news articles from around the world on any topic with context like a source's political leaning, reliability, and ownership, so that readers know exactly where information is coming from. But one of my favorite things on the site is the blind spot feed, which shows stories that are disproportionately reported by one side of the political spectrum. If you're on the left, it's useful to see stories only the right is covering and vice versa. They make accurately understanding current events much easier with access to primary sources alongside.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure the only thing we can measure is the objectivity of bias, not the incremental measure of bias. All we can do is say or make the judgment call or the definitive decision that this is bias or unbiased. How bias is subjective, and maybe that'll kind of stir some thoughts in everyone else's head. But the thing that I've noticed is the second that we start saying, "Oh, this is this much bias," well, where's that coming from? Where's that measure coming from? Because that sounds like a subjective measure to say how biased something is. The scientific measure is only whether it's biased or not. It's like, hey, this article is biased, this article is biased, this article is biased. Okay, cool. And then this fourth article is unbiased. Got it. How biased those articles are, that sounds off to me. Because to say, well, it's only 40% biased, it's like, yeah, by whose measure? And because bias is a psychological factor of values and characteristics per person, that's not a universal measure, nor could it ever be. That's like saying the entire sense of humanity is universal. No, that's not the case. I think that this kind of app is good for identifying what articles have bias and what articles don't have bias. Anything beyond that, I think, is false.
How the news interprets it, allowing me to fully trust my perception of the world. And they aren't funded by big tech or media companies so that they can stay as non-partisan and factual as possible. Ground News relies on subscriptions to keep their mission of transparency going, so support them by going to ground.news/moon to check it out today. My link gets you 40% off of their unlimited access Vantage plan. So check out Ground News today. But to truly understand where this goes and what are the repercussions of us living in an addiction economy, we need to take a quick look at Las Vegas, a petri dish city that was one of the first to experiment with this kind of economy. You see, the Las Vegas of today is run pretty much by a small handful of companies that own all of the hotels and casinos on the Strip.
Las Vegas has its city limits that stop at the beginning of the Strip, Sahara Avenue. Casino operators intentionally were outside the city. They didn't want to deal with city taxes and fees. Technically, when you're on the Strip, you are literally in paradise.
These faceless giant companies are usually offshoots of investment funds or mega chains from New York that are doing everything humanly possible to addict and exploit anyone who arrives in the city. It's a giant billion-dollar industry, an industry of casinos, entertainment, hookers, drugs, and alcohol. At the core of Las Vegas is gambling, an industry inherently linked to addiction. The design and operation of casinos in Las Vegas is meticulously crafted to maximize the time visitors spend gambling, thereby increasing the city's revenue.
These casinos pump extra oxygen in the building to keep you awake and keep you more alert. And again, this is one of their mini tricks to keep you gambling, to take more of your money.
Psychological manipulation plays a crucial role in this, as casinos are obviously designed to be immersive environments where you lose complete track of time and become so engrossed in the gambling.
I don't know about y'all, but I've never been a fan of casinos. Ever since I was a kid, and I'm talking like under the age of 10, if I was in a casino, I would just have this eerie feeling of being out of place and being surrounded by just wrong. Like an immoral feeling of sorts. And it's not because I was in new places or strange places. You gotta imagine, like, I've been in several parts of Mexico as a kid, and I've been through several parts of metropolitan type cities, and it was never the case until I went to a casino and I just felt off. What's interesting to me is as I grew up and I was able to reflect back on that process and think about those kind of cognitions, it's just like, well, now it makes sense. Now, could that be a little bit of bias because of how I view gambling? To a certain extent, I think that there's a safe way to gamble. I think there's a way to have casual interests without getting consumed by it. So I don't want to say that's what it was. It was just maybe other people felt the same way, and I'm not bashing on the people that are tied to it as an interest, although it can also be a judgment should you be consumed by it. So there's that too.
experience, you don't realize how much money you've actually spent. The absence of clocks and windows creates a sense of timelessness, encouraging you to play all day and night without ever realizing how long you've been sat there. And the use of lighting, colors, exciting sound effects creates this stimulating atmosphere that almost feels like a fairy tale.
Bonus frequency was good, the bonuses were fun, the graphics are beautiful, line pays were good. Music, I mean, there's a lot of people are saying it's a great game.
All of this is psychological manipulation, and it's tested in laboratories and on animals. Everything possible to addict you is being employed here. Even loyalty programs, where you can get various rewards such as free drinks and discounted stays, as well as complimentary meals, all makes you want to gamble more and spend more money at these hotels. These perks create a false sense of achievement and incentivize repeat visits, something that's all too familiar in the rest of the economy. And by doing this, they foster a loyal customer base that continually returns to gamble in Vegas, making it the third most visited city in the US by tourists. And it not only increases the amount of money spent, but also ensures a steady stream of repeat customers. Each year, more and more is invested into this. The floor plans are designed to be labyrinth, making it so easy to be lost in a maze of gambling tables. Everywhere you walk, all the hotels, shopping malls, everything you can think of is all connected by giant hallways of casinos. You're always surrounded by the sights, sounds, the intrigue of the hotels, all the entertainment, everything is there to keep you gambling. All the advanced algorithms, the psychological triggers, the intermittent reward systems create such a compelling cycle of addiction that most of these hotels are worth billions alone. Once you're in this disorientated, timeless, and dopamine-stimulated state of mind, the billion-dollar investment funds controlling this use all of their powers to unload a wave of other addictions at you at the same time to keep you in this unthinking stupor. From the minute you arrive at the airport, adverts for the biggest dispensaries in the world are shoved in your face, brothels scattered around the city, and once you're actually in the strip itself, you're in one of the only areas in the whole of America where you can drink openly on the streets without issues. So once all your primal desires are satiated, and you've been put into a drunken high stupor, you'll find yourself in the Venus flytrap that is the Strip. Bombarded with lights, mascots, icons, drugs, alcohol, and women, every single thing around you is designed to addict you. And once you're there, it's almost impossible to escape without spending a fortune. And of course, at the heart of this money-making machine is addiction. And it's working amazingly for Vegas. The economy there is booming. So what if you extrapolate this and implement it into every other facet of the wider economy? Well, this is what's happening today. You see, the reason Vegas is so economically successful.
So there is something called industrial organizational psychology, and it has typically two spectrums that it engages with, and that's internal and external. Obviously, it has its own terms, but for the way that I'm going to explain it, it's useful for that explanation. Internal can be a psychologist that has a scope and spectrum of improving the work-life or employee wealth and welfare of an organization, basically the way that it operates, whether it's leadership, the system mechanisms, or the other efficacies or ethics that the business has. Diving in, finding out where some kinks are, maybe incorporating better schedules, being concerned about work to family, personal life ratio, and things of that effect. And in which case it's good, because you have basically a professional trying to incorporate a better, healthy living and lifestyle for your employees, so that way they in turn obviously do more for the company that you hired that professional to kind of investigate. Now, when it comes down to the external, that's obviously almost the opposite. It's how to, and that's not always the case, but in most cases, it's how to make this company as efficient as possible. Now, when it comes down to marketing or establishing a market need for something, entertainment can be one of the monsters. It's almost a way to incorporate a professional to make it more predatory, make it more advertising, make it more interesting, satisfying, appealing to the eye, appealing to more senses, to draw a conclusion to make consumers want more of it. And that's the hidden side of psychology in some cases, because typically when people think psychology, they think of the study of the brain or they think therapy. It's not just those two avenues. And this concept obviously ties into the human brain and how we either can make people more efficient or we can be more effective on people in general. It brings a bad sight to psychology in my perspective, and when I went through my studies of industrial and organizational psychology, there was some stuff there where, although working on employee welfare was good, understanding and making companies more vicious towards consumers was something else that I was a little off by.
Successful for a handful of investors is exactly the same reason it's the model of addiction replicated in all industries. Just like I mentioned before, and as is done in Vegas, subscriptions and point systems are one of the best ways to addict you on a constant basis. For instance, if Netflix were to become a one-time purchase product, it would cost at least $2,000 for the basic ad-free plan. However, by spreading it monthly, it makes the service far more palatable for consumers. Same with all the Apple products, same with cars, same with mortgages, everything's the same here. And investors love this because it makes businesses easier to operate and scale. There's very little fluctuations in income, and this predictability allows companies to plan their expenses more effectively and invest in growth without needing to keep large cash reserves to weather potential downturns. And this is why Americans are spending more and more on services that were once done and dusted purchases. But there's a much more shady side to this addiction economy, and we can see the issues of this most clearly in the vaping industrial complex. You see, e-cigarettes and vapes were originally invented to help those who smoke give up the habit, or at the least allow them a hit of nicotine without the damage of smoking tobacco. But however good the initial intention, vaping soon became just another way of exploiting human addiction. As interest in sales of vaping products took off, vape manufacturers such as Juul Labs, Enjoy and Blue began offering a range of nicotine-containing products in various flavors and formulations. Big tobacco companies such as Philip Morris International, British American Tobacco, and Japan Tobacco International all started to enter the market themselves, either through acquisitions, partnerships, or the development of their own vaping products. So what started out as a mission to get people off addiction became a new multi-billion-dollar addicting industry, all designed with colors, flavors.
It was never intended to get people off addiction. It was intended to get people off of plain cigarettes into something more entertaining. The reason why this was such a monopoly was because in the 90s and the early 2000s, you had non-stop advertisements of smoking is bad. It was like the coughing lungs, the children coughing, secondhand smoke. And there was a lot of bashing on people that smoked cigarettes specifically. Well, as people started to get judged more and more for smoking cigarettes, because obviously before the 90s, it was like the cool thing. It was like a thing that if you didn't do it, you were weird. And now, obviously in the 90s and early 2000s, it's like if you did it, then it was kind of disgusting. It was more gross than not. Well, that started to take its effect, and that stigma started to take its effect. When e-cigarettes came into play, it wasn't just the fact that it was this healthier way of doing it, which obviously wasn't the case. It was the fact that it didn't have the same perspective and imagery of smoking a cigarette, and instead an e-cigarette was obviously much more acceptable as a open behavior than having a cigarette between your fingers. And because cigarettes was the thing that kept people at bay from diving into such an addiction like this, it led to more people getting involved with something like e-cigarettes because it had a bigger aesthetic appeal than the stigma that was tied to the normal cigarettes that we knew from the 90s and 2000s. Obviously, there's still people that smoke cigarettes, plain old cigarettes, but the point is that this was the same thing. And not only that, people did more of this than original cigarettes. It was terrible. And people still want to argue that this is like, no, this was a good thing. It's anytime you're trying to prey upon people for a market need, you're not doing the world a service. You're not. This is just another one of those examples.
Advertised as a healthier alternative, and oftentimes with far more nicotine, the substance that's actually getting you addicted in the first place. And a perfect example of the dangers of this can be seen with Josh Temple. You see, in the early 2010s, a young actor named Josh Temple realized he wasn't going to be an actor, but he was starting to see that the potentiality of states legalizing weed in America was becoming a real possibility, and he wanted to be at the heart of this boom. So he decided to venture into the weed business, founding his own company, Honeycut Labs. And from 2011 to 2018, Josh Temple immersed himself in the THC vaping scene, learning everything he could about the industry. And that was when he found the lucrative niche of THC cartridges. Realizing this was going to be a giant industry, Josh launched a product early on that would become infamous, the Honeycut Diluting Agent. You see, Honeycut's flagship product was a cutting agent designed to be mixed with THC oil and vape cartridges. It had no taste, no smell, and maintained the same viscosity as pure THC oil, making it indistinguishable from the real thing. primarily being made from vitamin E acetate. It was great because you could dilute THC oil and increase profits significantly with this new agent. And so by 2019, with the legalization of cannabis, Josh's products were selling rapidly as demand for THC cartridges soared across the US. Competitors saw their success and began to flood the market with this stuff, all using the same vitamin E acetate in vape cartridges. Little did anyone know how deadly this would truly be. In April 2019, hospitals in Illinois and Wisconsin started seeing a surge of young, otherwise healthy patients admitted with severe lung injuries. These patients exhibited symptoms such as chest pain, nausea, and shortness of breath. Nobody knew what this was, but suddenly the cases were piling up. However, they all had one thing in common. They were vaping frequently. So the CDC began investigating this mysterious illness taking over America, and that was when they found that those using THC vape cartridges were having their health destroyed by this THC agent, vitamin E acetate. Later that year, it got so bad that there were 2,800 reported cases and 68 deaths linked to this, as they saw when vaporized this compound was causing severe respiratory issues, including lipoid pneumonia, a condition where fat particles enter the lungs. And that was when Josh Temple had realized the gravity of this entire situation, quickly leaving Honeycutt Labs and changing the company's registered address and recalling all his products back, shutting down everything and leaving the company as soon as possible. But despite this, the authorities were after him, and Andrew Cuomo, the former governor of New York, would issue a subpoena for Honeycutt, demanding detailed information about the company's operations. And just like that, Josh Temple disappeared from the map. And there's very little information about what happened next. Nobody really knows what happened, or if he ever faced any legal consequences for this. But it started to show the dangers of the incentivization of weaponizing people's addictions against them. And Josh's story is just the tip of a giant iceberg. The entire vaping industry strategy to capitalize on nicotine addiction reflects a broader trend in which companies across all sectors are exploiting addictive psychology to ensure customer loyalty. Because from a business perspective, having an addicted customer base is incredibly advantageous. And what's even better is an addictive population, as once you've made a population dependent.
Man, 2 words, longitudinal studies. You got to understand that in order to know something is safe, you can't wait for a 3-year test to come out and say, oh, it's safe. That doesn't work. You need longitudinal studies. That means over long periods of time before you decide to dive into something. Give it 10 years, give it 15 years to really gauge the time span of such an outcome. The reason why we were able to draw up such a negative effect around regular cigarettes is because we had time to really hash out what it was doing, how long it took to do this thing on average, and then being able to find that out on the back end. And another thing is there's a whole lot of misinformation regarding addiction. A lot of people think that so many substances don't require it. So addiction is tied to the effects of tolerance and withdrawal. If something that you take and you develop a tolerance to it to an extensive point to where you have to do more of it to reach this similar stimulus that you received from the first time you did it, and then when you stop doing it and you have any negative effects whatsoever, withdrawals, that labeled the addiction. That means things like weed. There can be an addiction there because a lot of people that smoke weed for prolonged periods of time, and then they do more and more and more of it, and then whenever they're not on it, they feel off, headaches, migraines, paranoid, nervous, things of that effect. Those are your withdrawals. Those are your withdrawals. And all it does is it leads you back to smoking more weed because that's your addiction and this is your way to solve it. Now, obviously, to each their own in regards to the vices that they choose, but understand that a vice is a vice. And it either controls you or you control it. And I think that is really the outcome of something being positive or negative for you.
On you make sure you always have money coming in every single month. This reduces customer acquisition costs and also increases lifetime customer value, making addiction a highly profitable strategy. And of course, like we've already mentioned, this is so prevalent in almost every industry, from vaping to gambling, social media, even hotels, everything. Every single brand is now doing this with points, rewards, offers, subscriptions, getting millions upon millions to unknowingly fall into the addiction economy that the Western system seemingly relies on today. And the more and more dependent the population becomes, the easier it is for these companies to raise prices continually, allowing the market to always squeeze you dry as all other alternatives get crushed by this. And if they're not economically destroying a population, they're also destroying them physically. For example, the food and drinks industry is estimated to be worth hundreds of billions of dollars in the US alone. While the provision of quality food in abundance throughout the year is one of the biggest life-changing achievements of modern society, the most profitable side of the business has come recently with the introduction of ultra-processed foods, which is pushing people to eat more and more and spend even more on food. Canned goods, packaged snacks, ready-to-eat meals, sugar-saturated cereals, GMO crops, Monsanto-owned seeds. The control of food by a handful of companies has made the entire world reliant on just a few name brands. With the convenience they provide and the addictive formulas they put in the food, it's become just a normal part of life that people eat slop on a daily basis. Slop with ingredients people don't even know, but the convenience, palatability, and shelf stability has made this food cartel insanely powerful. And because they're so powerful, it's almost impossible for any researcher or scientist to get mainstream notice about the damage it's doing to the West. Time and time again, it's been shown that big food uses bogus science, pays off researchers, pays off the scientific community to lie about the dangers of foods, so that nobody's ever aware of how dangerous the addictive slop they're selling really is. Foods that contain a long list of additives, preservatives, flavorings, and other artificial ingredients to enhance taste, texture, and appearance. High in refined carbohydrates, added sugars, unhealthy fats, and sodium, while lacking all essential nutrients, fiber, and other beneficial compounds found in whole foods. And the more often we eat these foods, the more we expect all food to be blissfully delicious, and reject the plainier taste and texture of old-fashioned real food.
I think one way to combat this is obviously avoiding headline evidence and actually looking into the things that your body needs or the regularities of what your body would need on average, and obviously accumulating a variety of that over time, and then looking into what you eat if you care to do so.
The stuff that's been demonized by the corrupted scientific community who's paid off by these big food companies. Even Edward Bernays was infamous for using propaganda against Americans to convince them that having bacon every day in the morning was a healthy, iconic American thing to do, all for the benefit of a few giant corporations in America profiting from the fact. And if that was done almost 100 years ago, you can only imagine what they're doing today. I mean, almost everything in the shops these days is stuffed with ingredients that almost makes the food you're having completely unnatural. In fact, it's actually becoming harder and harder to eat healthy and just have food without all of these ingredients. And through trial and error, Big Food has discovered the ingredients that really appeal to us, the colors that strike out at kids. It's almost at a subconscious level at this point. They found that the right amount of emulsifiers produces an irresistible texture. They know that inverted fructose syrup really fires up the brain's sugar receptors. Modified food starch is used as a thickener, and hydrolyzed protein is used as a flavor enhancer, making it seem that having chocolatey protein bars or things like Huel is somehow actually healthy. And unfortunately, many of the ingredients used are no longer recognized by the body as food. They are just chemicals that make us want to eat the product in which they've been put. So much of what we buy to eat is not necessary. It is just there to provide satisfaction and dopamine. Short bursts of it. Not long-term satisfaction of healthy living, but the short-term satisfaction of relieving an addiction. I mean, is it any wonder that people across the world are now starting to have the worst health in history? More and more people are obese. More are suffering from sicknesses, allergies, and overall food addiction. And as a result of this, hundreds of billions have been made for a select handful of giant food companies. But nothing is more devastating or evil in the addiction economy as the pharmaceutical addiction sweeping the streets across the state.
If anyone wants to blame the food as the problem, sure, Moon's wrong on this one. We're having a profound outcome of health issues regards to people's BMI and their own consumption because poor impulse control, self-regulation is an issue, and the value of people in general has decreased. We have less control than we used to. And a lot of it is because we've incorporated grand senses of impulses without any sense of control in young states of childhood. You can't say that the reason why this is because certain things are involved in certain kinds of food. It's not all food. It's certain kinds of food. And at the end of the day, that's your choice. If you went to the fast food place, instead of getting a bag of rice, some lean ground turkey, and some damn carrots from the grocery store, that's your prerogative. But we can't say, well, it's because the food did it. No, you ate the food. No one made you eat the food. And anyone that wants to argue the whole cost comparison, it's cheaper for you to buy the grocery stuff than it was to buy the meal. If you went to Burger King, for example, it's like $10, $12 for a sandwich, fries, and a drink, what have you. And then if you get a bag of rice, a bag of carrots, and a pound of ground turkey, for that matter, you're looking at an equivalent price, and you can save the meal that you bought at the grocery store for a couple days. The idea that it's cheaper to eat out is bogus. And the reason why it's bogus is because you're just not choosing the right things. Now, obviously, if we pick the best of the best and we get excessive amounts of it, sure, that comparison can be terrible. Fruit, in one case, is pretty expensive, and I get that too. But you don't need as much fruit as you think you do. You know, a piece of fruit a day is pretty solid, and then you can gauge that throughout your week. Obviously, if you get 7 apples, naturally you want a little more variety. But if you got, as an example, if you got 7 apples, that's going to be about $6 to $7, depending on how much is there, right? Okay, cool. That's $1 a day. You incorporate what I said earlier in larger portions. All right, cool. You're going to probably leave out of a grocery store paying $40, $50. I'm gonna stay towards 45 to be fair. And then that's what you're paying throughout a week. Obviously, you have your essentials, hygiene, and different things, maybe breakfast that you want to set up as well. Got it. I understand. But we're talking lunch and dinner meals typically is what's normally bought for fast food. Although I'm a man of breakfast from time to time too. But my point is that we can't point at such a thing. Personal choice is 100% affected by this. And although having random things in our food can be a problem, we are choosing to eat those foods, and we're choosing to eat those foods in large amounts.
States. Criminal cartels and legalized pharmaceutical cartels are spreading debilitating substances into the hearts of communities across America. In 1996, Purdue Pharma introduced OxyContin, a long-acting formulation of oxycodone, and Purdue would market OxyContin aggressively as a breakthrough treatment for chronic pain, claiming that its extended-release formula reduced the risk of addiction and abuse.
Less than 1% of patients taking opioids actually become addicted.
However, Purdue did everything they could to downplay the risks of addiction and minimized all concerns about the potential for misuse, which, as you could guess, contributing to widespread overprescribing and overuse of OxyContin. The widespread availability of prescription opioids like OxyContin led to a surge in opioid prescription and misuse in the United States. Millions upon millions became unknowingly addicted to opioids after being prescribed them for legitimate medical reasons. And as this became more and more common, soon these opioids were being illicitly sold on the streets, all through doctor shopping. It didn't take long for overdose deaths to skyrocket, leading to what is now recognized as the opioid epidemic. And you can see it on the streets. Poor homeless people freaking out on the streets. Quote-unquote zombies in places like Philadelphia and San Francisco. But the pharmaceutical companies, of course, made billions from this. But for an untold amount of patients, opioid treatment led to years of paying for a substance they didn't need and were addicted to. All the while, Big Pharma continues to market their products by bribing healthcare providers with financial incentives, leading to a huge overprescription of drugs and long-term use of short-term drugs. And not content with making billions of dollars from the opioids themselves, Big Pharma then also capitalized on the opioid epidemic by profiting from the treatment and recovery industry, creating the problem and then selling the solution. Because the more addicted you are to their substances, the more money they make, which they can then use to lobby the government with for more control and power to push these addictions on the people. And it's not just opioids, Ritalin, Adderall, anything you can think of is being pushed on the American public to make them more addicted to these pills.
How did OxyContin take over the marketplace? So originally Oxy was meant for people who were like terminally ill with cancer and were in severe pain, or somebody who's on the upper echelon of the pain threshold. And the goal of a company and a rep is to grow the market and to hit the number. And so when you go out, it's like, how do you grow the market? Well, we're going to grow the patient demographic. We're going to have to grow. We need the doctors to write more of this. So what they did with OxyContin was they went out and started. It got to a point where they were literally promoting it for people with migraines, and they were pumping these pain pills into all these practices.
And today, this whole process is accelerating in every industry. Everything from renting pods and never being able to afford property, to even delivery service subscriptions just to push your order ahead of others' orders. Even finding love has become a commodity. I mean, almost everyone is using dating apps these days to find someone, but the truth is, dating apps aren't really meant to actually work. If they work too quickly, they wouldn't make nearly as much money from the subscriptions. People would use them a few times, find someone meaningful, and then delete their account. Instead, these apps do everything to keep people on the apps for as long as possible, addicting you to their service. At first, they bombard people with attention to make them feel wanted, giving them a huge dopamine surge, putting them at the top of the algorithm to increase their chances. They'll show you all these beautiful people just waiting for you to have, but very quickly, they'll take away this honeymoon period, tightening the valve to make you purchase a subscription. It happens on every app, stringing you along with little dopamine bursts until they make you so.
I mean, the way that relationship psychology kind of works is that if someone is constantly bombarded with other options or other avenues that they could explore and have fun with or excitement with, it's common knowledge to say that the beginning of a relationships are typically the most exciting. Got it. What often fails in current society is our ability to cultivate that relationship past the beginning into something greater. Now, that's hard work, but that's hard earned also, which makes it less fun, less entertaining or exciting because you actually have to invest now. Now, it's obviously a change. And the reason why things like these dating apps are so profound is because it's constantly giving everyone an option all the time. And if it gives you an option all the time, how likely is it that you're going to engage in that investment? No, you're going to think, well, this isn't working out because we had fun and then it died down and then now it's nothing. I want more excitement again. Well, no wonder. No wonder it died down, because it was the only thing that kept it high in the beginning was the fact that you were two new people. What happened? No one worked on anything. The man didn't do anything. The woman didn't do anything. And so naturally it died down. It wasn't because the fire fizzled out. Y'all just didn't do nothing with the fire. And well, naturally that's going to go its route and it's going to be linear. And everyone's stuck in this linear path in regards to relationships, not realizing that if it's linear, it's because you are not doing anything with it. You want to find the answer outside of dating apps and things of that sort. Start investing and start choosing wisely in the person that you're investing into. Allow yourself to see investment on their side. And if they're not, then move on, because you are wasting your time. You're going to be the person investing. They're the person that's going to be living in this linear plane of existence, never meeting you on anything. Cut it short, get out of there, find someone that is willing to work with you or just willing in general. Go a long way.
So desperate that you start spending money on the app itself, using your primal psychology to addict you to their services. All entertainment is the same thing. Nobody owns music, nobody owns movies anymore, it's all rented. And now even renting isn't enough. Even if you rent, you still have to watch forced ads and have to pay extra subscriptions to get away from these ads. And God knows what this is going to look like with the rise of AI. Only time will tell, but it is clear that every single thing is slowly being made into another facet of the addiction economy. And it's a horrible, worrying trend, because the longer this continues, the poorer the average person becomes, and the less sense of security you have in the world, because you don't own anything. And so the more aware we become of this coming trend, the more we can fight back against it with our wallets and our voices.
So that was Moon's addiction economy, and there's obviously a few points there. I think you did a good job at covering wide scopes, also providing some scientifically proven articles with some obviously less publicized types. The one thing that I've noticed is that subscriptions has kind of always been a thing. We just knew it as the term bills. Everyone had monthly bills, annual bills, bi-monthly bills. We always had bills. This is nothing new. This is not some new wave of, this isn't some brand new concept. We've always had bills for the things that we found necessary or not or unnecessary. And obviously, the more money we make will dictate whether we'd have more unnecessary bills that we paid. That doesn't really mean a whole lot. And the one thing that we have to remember is that these are all concepts that we are freely choosing. The one thing that I've noticed is that in the absence of purpose, addiction exists. And addiction can exist in various forms, from severe to casual. You'd be surprised how much of the population has a casual addiction. It's just one of those things that gradually eats at our purpose, or at least diminishes our purpose and engages in more and more neglect of our life. It's not going to completely take it over. Eventually we'll have days like, no, I need to get this done, I need to get that done, in which case severe addiction would trump those completely. In casual addictions, we win from time to time because it just depends on our stimulation of whatever we're casually addicted to. This can come in various forms of hobbies, video games, things that tend to run a little more of our life than it should. And we need to understand that we either own our hobbies or they own us, and that can take various forms no matter what the interest is. The only thing that we can do is be aware, because the one thing that is decreasing across the entire span of human existence lately, or at least in developed countries, is our sense of self-regulation. It's going down the drain. It's going down the drain because we have lesser and lesser forms of characterological development amongst our childhood that doesn't allow us to be concrete in the great question of identity versus concept, self versus concept. And the more that we're at war with that kind of ideology, the more we may fall victim to the impressionable concepts that's being shoved in our faces that say, hey, dive into all your impulses. It's okay. It's not okay. It's not okay. My last point is that doesn't mean you're doomed. You're not doomed. You're young, cool. You're not doomed. You're old, cool. You're not doomed. Everything is by design trying to work against the concept of your self-regulation. Okay, apply more self-regulation. Now, obviously, that sounds a little trivial. It's like, well, I'm sad. Well, don't be sad. Obviously, it kind of sounds along those regards, but the point is that so many people think these are things that is completely outside of their control. It's not. This is all well within your control. It's just, sure, companies are learning better and better ways of making people forget that part. The concepts of addiction or addiction economy is not new. It's been around the block. It's just being done in new ways. Sure, that's something I can agree with. Obviously, I disagreed and agreed with several other different points amongst the video, but that's one thing that I'm going to stand firm on. We need to understand that just because companies and organizations are getting better at this kind of concept, that doesn't mean that we should be lesser and be slaves to what we're engaging in. Because for the people that think their own ignorance is freedom, it's not. You're slave to those impulses. You're always entertaining these things. You're always getting engaged in these things. You're not free. Each one of those concepts is a chain on your neck. And freedom is the idea that you accomplished or developed a greater sense of self-regulation that at least combats the impulses as they come. That's not easy. It's simple, but it's not easy. And I understand that may take some time. I challenge everyone to give it a shot. I promise that in today's society, it'll do you some good. With that being said, thanks to everyone who watched the video. If you liked the video, like it. If you enjoyed the content so far, consider subscribing. If you disliked the video, dislike it. Hopefully you never see me again. I understand I said some things, to each their own. But leave a comment in the comment section down below for any of your thoughts on addiction and how this has gradually become a different monster over time. Like I said, in my perspective, it's always been a thing. I'd like to know your thoughts. So thanks again, and I'll go ahead. See you next time.